So today's topic, I got to remind myself what I wrote. We're going to talk all about the ego and how we try to destroy it on a spiritual path. That was very well written last week. The ego and how we try to destroy it on the spiritual path. So let's start talking about the ego. Now, when I speak of the ego, there's 50 million interpretations of that word ego. If you've been around the block a couple times, you probably have your own interpretation, especially if it's a spiritual interpretation. Now, there is spirituality and psychology, like, brother and sister, right? Kissing cousins. They're kissing cousins, spirituality and psychology, right? So there's no separation anyway, but that's all. That isn't another conversation. That is what we're talking about. So ego is a psychological construct. If traditionally, ego can be related to Freud. Freud is one of the people that really use the word ego in popular vernacular, right? Freud really used that a lot. Freud's ego is not the ego we're talking about. It's similar, but it's not the same thing. It's not the same thing. So let's talk about what ego we're going to be talking about today. So from A Course in Miracles point of view, the ego is the part of you, that's a clue right there, a part of you that thinks without love. Let me say it again. The ego is the part of you that thinks without love. Okay? So that's what the Course in Miracles would call it. I will go on to say that the ego is well, let me say this. A part of you immediately implies dualism, right? Implies that there's another part of you somewhere, right? So the ego is that part of you that thinks without love. Very easy. A lot of people will hear that and they go, oh yeah, that's right. Because the part of you that thinks without love is in the dream state, in the illusion, basically. So many times we're taught, the ego is bad. Even in the Course in Miracles, it'll say the ego is trying to kill you. It says, do not be mistaken. This is how it says it. Do not be mistaken. The ego is trying to kill you. And it is. It is. Not literally trying to kill you. It's doing what it's supposed to do to make sure that you keep searching and you never find what you're looking for. You know that song. Find what you're looking for. You know that song. So you never find what you're looking for. The ego's edict is search, but do not ever find. The ego's edict the ego wants to kill you in this way, that it will never allow you to just live in unconditional love. Right? So that's the ego we're talking about here. The part of you that keeps you in separation. The part of you that keeps you in the illusion. Right? So on spiritual paths, this referred to all the time. And many times, nothing's right or wrong. Just so you know, everything that we're talking about, nothing's right or wrong. I have to say that over and over and over. I'm not here to tell you this is the right way and that's the wrong way. That is not what we're doing here. We're just talking about how things work. So the ego is used in the spiritual path as the enemy. Dun, dun, dun. You have to make sure you deal with that ego. You have to make sure that you get rid of that ego. You have to make sure that you do not listen to that ego. Does that sound familiar? Sound familiar? Of course, I'm over dramatizing it all, but does that sound familiar? Yes or no? And what are you thinking about right now? This is the point in the conversation where we pause and you get to speak. So what do you have to say? Hello, Girl Rush. Can we ever use the ego for good? There is no good and there is no bad. That's the answer. Kyrie says, yes, familiar. Conquer yourself and your wicked ways. I like how the Christians say, this is one of my favorite things. Get behind me, Satan. Satan, get behind me. Whatever that. I love that. The ego is the Satan character. The Satan character. Girl West, did you get what I just said? And did everyone get what I just said? There is no good and there is no bad. Part of the reason why there's ego is because you believe that there's something good and there's something bad. Girl Rush says, so the ego destroys non-duality. So interesting, right? So, first of all, there isn't anything called non-duality. It's just a concept. It's just a belief, and no belief is true. Let me just say that, right? But we have to use in communication and in the separate world, we have to use words. But there's no real non-duality, right? Because there's no real duality. The ego doesn't destroy non-duality. Now, the ego, let's come back to the ego's job is to keep you from having the experience of oneness, of unconditional love. So you're right. Okay, so I want to read you something that Jed says about the ego really quickly. Now, when I first read this, I was like, I've been saying that forever. And then I read it here and I was like, oh, yeah, of course. But here we go. The process of awakening looks like it's about destroying the ego. But that is not really accurate. You never completely rid yourself of the ego or the false self as long as you're alive. I've been saying that. If you've been following me, I've been saying that for 20 years. You don't get rid of the ego. You don't get rid of the false self. It doesn't happen. As long as you have a body, the body is the symbol of the separation. As long as you have a body, there's going to be an ego hanging around, basically. So you don't completely rid yourself of the ego, the false self, as long as you're alive. And it's not really important that you do. It's not important that you do. What matters, this is the beginning of the journey. What matters is the emotional tethers that anchor us to the dream state. What holds us in place and makes us feel that we're a part of something that seems like it's real. I'm going to say that again. What matters is the emotional tethers that anchor us to the dream state, that hold us in place and make us feel that we are part of something that seems real. That's it. That is it, my friends. Remember how I said psychology, spirituality, M shows, en français, same thing, psychology, spiritual. There is no separation anyway. But when he says, what matters is the emotional tethers that anchor us to the dream state, that hold us in place and make us feel that we're part of something that seems real. When you are dealing with the world on the world's terms, you are, for lack of a better term, asleep. when you start to realize that you have one, and when he says emotional tethers, what that means is stories. Simplistically, stories. We have to see the emotional tethers that keep us thinking that if we don't live, something's wrong. I know that's heavy. That if we aren't happy, something's wrong. If we don't get what we want, something's wrong. If we succeed, something's right. If we're pretty, everything's honky-dory. If we're ugly, it's bad. Do you understand? That is conditional living in the dream state. And that conditional living in the dream state is the reason why you suffer. Because there's stories. And these stories that you have playing in your mind are the thing that is keeping you in the dream state. Now, the ego, coming back to the ego doesn't tell you that that's a dream. It tells you that it's real. That it's real. Right? We were talking about plays earlier today. It's exactly the same as when an actor is in a role. And there's the actor, and then there's the character. So the actor gets the character, learns their lines, learns everything about it, then they go onto the stage, your life, and they begin to act the play out. Well, what happens is from this analogy, is that the actor forgets they're an actor, and they think they are the character. That's what's happening with you. That's what I tell you, 100% of you right now believe you are the character you've created. And that character has been created by the ego. Ultimate illusion, greatest lie was ever told. That's right. I'll tell you in some way that what we're talking about here is a very bleak message. You're not going to get anything from this because the only thing that needs to get anything is the egoic mind. The separated self believes it needs to get something. You're going to be really disappointed because there's nothing to get, because there's no you to get it, because you are just a character. People listen to me and they're like, turn it off. I'm leaving. I'm leaving. I don't want that. I want someone to build up my character and make my character feel really good about being a character. And that'll be the star of the play. And then when I'm the star of the play, then everything will go right. Well, the play is going to end. And you're not the character. You're the actor. You're the actor. Not the character. There's no you there anyway. Kyrie says, I need to get out of the way. Well, and here's the deal. The only thing that needs to get out of the way, Kyrie and everyone, is the ego. Exactly. Good, Kyrie. When we're talking about trying to get rid of the ego or what to do with the ego, it's a fine conversation. Remember, nothing's right and nothing's wrong. Ever, 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 ever. But when we're having the conversation about what to do with the ego, that is the ego trying to deal with the ego. That's not the truth. Because the truth is far closer than you think. It's really obvious. It's right here.